Hello and welcome to this Higher Admin and IT 2022 Revision Support for Learners Guide. And this is very much based around the information that has been published by the SQA to support you in your Higher Admin and IT exam. Now, a little bit of background: at the start of the year, there were some modifications made to the course, and that's where advanced notice of content that would not be assessed was given to all the teachers, and that the assignment was reduced. But we're not going to be focused about those changes. We're going to be focused on preparation for the exam and what the exam in 2022 is going to look like. So one of the key things to start off by saying is that this guidance for the 2022 exam, in terms of the structure, the exam is as it would normally be. It's a 60-mark exam and it's got a duration of 1 hour and 45 minutes. So the SQA have very kindly provided us with some advanced notice of content that will be assessed. And this video is going to be very much focused around looking at the advanced notice of that content and seeing what it means, and then picking out some potential exam questions that could be similar to what we might expect within the 2020 exam. I guess it's important to say, I don't know what's in the exam, and you must make sure you're working very closely with your teachers or person who's responsible for delivering your course to be able to make sure that they have also taken this guidance, interpreted it, and shared it with you, because I see this as very much a team effort to be able to make sure that you achieve the very best that you possibly can. So yes, that's getting advice and guidance from this video and looking at some of the example questions and the talking through of the guidance that's been produced, but it's also working with those who know you best in your environment and could talk you through what they feel that the changes might mean for you and the content that you've covered so far in your course. But without further ado, let's start going through the elements of the exam that we have been guided upon in terms of areas to focus our revision. So we're starting off with the role of the administrative assistant. So we need to make sure we have awareness of the tasks, duties, and support that the administrative assistant is expected to provide in an organization. So we could be asked a question to talk about that role of an admin assistant and be able to make sure we're really clear on what duties, what tasks, what support they are going to provide in the organization that they're working in. And that might be given with a scenario context. And if it is, then we need to make sure we're relating directly to the scenario and making sure we're really clear about their tasks, duties, and support. So our first 6-mark question is: describe the possible implications for an administrative assistant who has poor time and task management skills. So it's worth 6 marks and it's a describe question, so there's going to be a fair bit of detail. I'd pause the video now and then we can pop through the answers to see what you've got down and see where you'd get the marks. As this is a describe question, to get the 6 marks, you're going to need to make sure that you're making a number of relevant factual points, and you're going to focus in on some of the characteristics and or the features of poor time and task management and the impact that's having on the admin assistant. So, the processes can either, you can relate your points either to the processes, the concepts, or the particular situation, as long as you're giving a number of straightforward points and then you're developing them on where required. So I would say you're going to get 1 mark for each factual point, and then an additional mark where you've made a further development of one of those relevant points. If you just listed a load of factual points, you're not likely to score more than 4 or 5 marks. So to reach the full 6 marks, you need some good points that have been well developed. So what might those points look like? Well, you could of course refer to the quality of their work being poor in an attempt to meet deadlines if they're rushing due to having poor time and task management skills. A result of this might be they may not be trusted with important or high level tasks, and that could in the long term affect their chances of promotion. Their relationships with other team members may suffer, as other members of the team may not be able to proceed with their own work. They may suffer from stress, which could result in illness and then being absent from work. They may receive a poor appraisal each year because they're not completing tasks as they should, either in terms of quality because they're rushing them, or on time to the deadline, which could go in about affecting their pay and or future career progression. They may need to be sent on training courses. Of course, training courses might have a cost implication for the organization. They might need to be given a mentor or a buddy to check on their workflow and check on the quality of their work. They may become quiet and withdrawn. They might stop communicating with other team members because they may be embarrassed that they can't complete things on time, or they haven't got good task management skills. Worst case scenario, this leading to them needing a verbal or a written warning. And if they still feel unsupported, then they could end up taking a grievance out against the organization. And that could take up a lot of unnecessary time and angst. So any of those points fully developed and putting them together to create yourself a nice described answer will be really important for achieving the full 6 marks in this question. The strategies for effective time and task management and their important section. Well, there's some skills that are going to be required to ensure this is successful: planning, delegating, organizing, directing, and controlling. So having a clear understanding of what each of those words mean and how they relate to time and task management. Because if you can get time and task management right in an organization, then it's going to be a far more effective organization. We need to make sure that we're setting targets and we understand what setting targets for individuals and the organization. So people within an organization will have individual targets, but the organization will also have high level strategic targets that they'll be wishing to meet. So we need to make sure that we understand, for example, what a personal development planning is undertaken, what action plans are, why we might use to-do lists, why it's important to prioritize using priorities lists, what do Gantt charts allow us to do in terms of project management and how we plan out a particular project, and also in terms of managing that time. E-diary is absolutely essential. So understanding that purpose of the e-diary and the benefits that it can bring. So we know that having effective time and task management is important, and we also know that they help boost the efficiency of an organization. So we will be looking at why we need to get those areas absolutely right. A question which relates to this area is: discuss the reasons why some teams are more effective than others. It's a 6-mark discuss question. So pause the video now and have a go. Nice developed answer, because we're having to create a discussion there. So looking at the answer here, we can see it's a discuss question. So discuss questions are more than just naming relevant points. When you've got your relevant points, you need to build them out and flesh them out with some further information. And you're going to be looking for six well-developed points here to ensure you're getting all the discuss marks that are available. So we might look here at team composition, for example, making sure we've got the right balance of people and we've got the right people in the right roles to make an effective team. We might need to think about the nature of the task, how challenging or structured are the tasks, and if we've got team members believing in the task, the challenge that they're facing, is everyone pulling in the same direction? A real key element is potentially the presence of a good leader, because this can help promote a positive atmosphere, provide good coordination, and manage conflict if it arises within a team. Team members support one another when working on projects together. And if they're well supported teams, then of course that's going to hopefully lead to better decision making and people feeling capable and able to take more risks. All team members need to have a clear idea of what they are trying to achieve. If they're all pulling towards the same clear goal, then team members believing in that shared goal, ensuring they have a common direction, is going to make them more effective. Shared knowledge means that we've got better coverage if anyone's off absent. So if we've got a team all working together and they're all understanding what aspects other people are working on, and they've got a shared knowledge bank between them, they can pick up any slack if anyone's off. Of course, there may be team members who have different skills and personalities, That's really good because this can lead to better productivity. Need to make sure there's strong and open communication between the team members. Team members should be encouraged to express their opinions, suggest ideas, and also be prepared to compromise. So somebody's not going to be always driving all the decisions. We've got ideas coming from everyone, and people are compromising and building on each other's ideas to be successful. Of course, the longer a team is together, the more effective it's likely to be because they will know how each other work. They become a cohesive group who can pull together, meeting targets and deadlines. And generally speaking, effective teams are normally small. If you think about the Belbin team principles, that would state somewhere between 4 and 6 people would be a really good size. Now, I've obviously gone through there and stated a load of different reasons about why teams are more effective than others. You would need to develop those points out so that it are read as a discuss answer to be able to make sure you achieved all the points. But if you're hitting those areas and you're giving good detail, then you'll be on for your full 6 marks. Continuing our focus on the strategies for effective time and task management, we need to make sure we can deal with changes in priority. So why would individuals, why would organizations need to be able to be responsive in dealing with changes in priorities? What could cause those changes in priorities, and why do we need to respond to them? And as we're moving through particular tasks, then there needs to be understanding about monitoring and evaluating progress through them. So that could be through meetings, it could be through accessing files and thinking about file management as a way of saving time. It might be having a buddy system within an organization or project management, having Gantt charts. And as we are moving through a particular project, tracking our progress through that project, using a Gantt chart to be able to make sure we're hitting key milestones, making sure we're getting the right tasks undertaken at the right time. Having an awareness of what's being referred to as time stealers. So where does time disappear to? How can we try and minimize their effect in independent working, group working, and meetings? So we want to make sure we're having a lean organization that is focused on the tasks in hand, and we're effectively assigning people a fixed amount of time to be able to complete set tasks, and we're supporting them in doing that. Because if we're getting it right, there's lots of benefits of having good time and task management. So making sure we are clear on what those benefits are and we're able to accurately state them is absolutely important. And that's from an individual's perspective. So why would an individual want to have good time and task management? But it's also from the organization's point of view as well. So why does an organization want to make sure that they are hitting particular project milestones at a particular time and keeping things on task? So focusing in on some questions then about the idea of time, we've got a question of outline 2 possible time stealers, and that's a 2-mark question, and then outline strategies that could be used to minimize each of these, and that's a 4-mark question. So 2 marks on 2 possible time stealers, and then 4 marks on outlining strategies that could be used to minimize each of these. Pause the video now and give them a go. So first of all, looking upon 2 possible time stealers. Well, it's an outline question, so just a couple of brief statements about each of these is absolutely fine. So just got some listed here: interruptions, telephones, visitors, emails. They certainly steal people's time quite quickly, stop you from getting on from the job. People have an inability to take on too much work because they don't say no enough. That can also be a big time stealer. People getting desk stress, being unable to find the information they need to be able to get on with their jobs. Getting people going to meetings and those meetings taking too long or overrunning, they can eat into that precious time when people should be getting their work done. Crisis management, let's say we have people continually off work or other things keep happening which you have to respond to. that becomes a time stealer. Procrastination, I think that's one that probably many of us can relate to. It's easy to go and find something else to do instead of do what we're meant to do. So that's a definite time stealer. Making unnecessary or duplicate journeys, just instead of getting yourself organized and knowing what you should be doing in what order, duplicating or doubling up on things is usually because people are a bit disorganized. So just outlining any two of those, just with a little bit of detail to explain what they are, would see you getting the 2 marks there. Turning our attention to strategies that could be used to minimize each of these, where we want to develop our strategies on a bit, make sure we're giving either some facts or features about how we can minimize them, or some key characteristics as well would help here. So in terms of the interruptions, we could have blocked time in the diary, which is do not disturb time. Could make sure voicemail is switched on, or we close the email down and only check emails at a certain time of day. Of course, if staff have got that on their own phones, alerting them to incoming messages, they can set some do not disturb times on them to make sure that they're not distracted. The inability to say no to work or taking on too much work, either be able to delegate that work onto somebody else or discuss the workload with their line manager to stop so much work coming to them. In terms of that, desk stress, being unable to find information. Good file management systems, absolutely important here. Try operating a clear desk policy. A good idea is to try and help with that. Meetings taking too long. Make sure we've got clear time limits, realistic agendas, and I guess if a meeting is running on, then the ability to kind of wrap it up and say, I've now got to move on and do my next task. That's a key skill to be able to have. Crisis management. If you find situations are taking up lots of time, and it's difficult to find a reasonable solution, then need to make sure there's plans in place to be able to manage that. Or if we've got people who offer a lot, how do we go about managing that unexpected staff absence, and maybe get a procedure in place. Procrastination, to-do lists. I mean, that's a big one. Get your priorities sorted, put the thing that you must get done at the top of your to-do list, and then order them absolutely essential, and work through that as quickly as we can. Don't make unnecessary or duplicate journeys by grouping jobs together. So visits to other departments are only made once a day. And if you're disorganized, back to our to-do list, asking for help, speaking to the line manager, looking at trying to delegate work. Any of those strategies can absolutely be used to minimize the impact of the time stealers, but just making sure you've got that clearly linked and then fully developed to be able to get the 4 marks that are available in that question. Keeping with the theme of time, we've got another 4-mark question here, which asks us to describe the following methods of monitoring and evaluating progress. So we're asked about the Gantt chart, and we're also being asked about the mentoring system. It's a 4-mark question, and it's a describe question. So with the Gantt chart, of course, it's a describe question. So you've got to make a number of relevant factual points, which may be the characteristics or the actual features of a Gantt chart. So graphical representation of planned work against work completed using a timeline, with the key events on the chart being called milestones, and milestones can be ticked off as we go. Each task or item of work is represented by a coloured bar on that chart, which indicates its start date and its end date. So we've got this idea of blocks of time being clearly marked and what work is being completed during that time. The chart is displayed in a prominent position within the workplace, so everyone is aware of the work and how it should be progressing. It allows both managers and individuals to quickly identify tasks or projects which are behind scheduled deadlines, and also make interventions to be able to get back on schedule. And it also helps see where the busy times and the quieter times are, which might help manage other workload. So that's 4 marks available. So a couple of marks on the Gantt chart, with also a couple of marks available for the mentoring system. So the mentor is someone who's familiar with all the details of a job or an organization, and they can offer on the job training, and they can both learn from each other in that partnership. I would say the mentor is probably doing more of the teaching, and the mentee is primarily doing the learning. But I absolutely think whenever you're having two people working together and they've got that dialogue, absolutely both of them will be learning from one another. The mentor can have responsibility of setting short-term targets. So if they've got weekly meetings, they can have key actions that need to happen between each of those weekly meetings, and the mentor can then appraise or evaluate the progress towards those targets. So is somebody getting better? Are they making better interventions, for example? And depending on the level of support required, can depend on the situation. So the mentor might have that flexibility to provide more support at times when it's needed, and then less support at other times. But being able to give specific guidance as the mentor regarding what someone's next steps are is going to be absolutely key. So making sure we've fully described a few of those key points there will see us getting the couple of marks that are available for mentoring that go with the couple of marks from the Gantt chart there as well. We're also being asked to make sure we have a knowledge of workplace legislation and strategies for ensuring compliance. So compliance is making sure people do what they're meant to do, so they're following the rules correctly. And sometimes we need to have some strategies in place. We need to have made some decisions about how we want to make sure they're being followed. And that legislation is, of course, referring to laws that are published by Parliament. But when we're thinking about following the guidelines, the legislation that has been published, there is both an employee and an employer responsibility. So under the current legislation, in areas such as health and safety, security, and data handling, we need to make sure that we know what the difference is between what an employee is responsible for. So that's somebody who works for the organization, and what the employer, so the organization itself, what they're responsible for doing. So the main provisions and the safety legislation that we're being directed to is the health and safety, and that's the first aid regulations from 1981. The Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations 1992, the Health and Safety Display Screen Equipment Regulations from 1992, and also the Fire Precautions Workplace Amendment Regulations from 1999. And then we've got the Freedom of Information Act 2000 as well. So those key pieces of legislation give us a really strong steer of the areas that we should be revising. And then knowing what they look like in a question is going to be absolutely key to being able to get the key pieces of information detailed down in our answers. So a question to this area might be about the pieces of legislation, or it might be about to outline suitable methods of informing staff of changes to legislation. And that's a 4-mark outline question. Give it a go now. So with any outline question, we'll be looking to make a number of brief statements which are appropriate to the questions. It's about information, informing staff about legislation, giving them the right information there. So email to all staff to ensure they have something in writing to refer to. Store the policy documents on the intranet so staff can have access to the most up-to-date legislation, so they know the policy is the most up-to-date based upon current legislation. Might wish to display notices to highlight specific policies that are important, or if there's been major updates that have occurred. Organise talks from relevant officials or trained staff to highlight changes and take any questions that any staff members may have. And of course, organise role plays where staff can practice situations, for example, dealing with a request for data from an outside agency, that could absolutely be, or in terms of working out what would happen in the event of some kind of emergency. So making sure you've got good communication, though, to be able to make sure that staff are informed of changes to legislation and how it impacts upon them in the workplace. We've got the impact of digital technology on the layout, working practices, communication methods, data handling, and file management of an organization. So, in terms of file management, we're being given some areas of good practice. For example, we should have naming conventions. So, what is a file naming convention? Well, it might be when we create a file, we actually date it from the date that we create it. And we might start with a year. So we might have year, month, and then day in terms of uh, laying that out. We might then have a dash or an underscore, and then we might have the name of the file. Whatever the naming convention is, it doesn't really matter, providing everyone is consistent in their use of their naming convention and they know why we're following that particular convention. And of course, a naming convention is important because it can help us find things more quickly, which can make an organization more efficient, and it can reduce the chance of having duplicate information going backwards and forwards. And that leaves us on really nicely to version control, especially if a document is being shared or emailed between multiple people who are working together, making sure we've got version control so people know what might be a draft version, what might be the first version that's been created, and what's going to be the latest version. And do we have a way of identifying something as a final version before it gets published, for example? Having systems in place to do that is absolutely essential. Of course, making sure that we can restrict access and have restricted access to certain files, because we would only want those who are meant to see it under legislation. Only people should have access to certain pieces of information. So making sure access is restricted. That might be through the networking requirements, or it might be through the use of passwording documents, for example. But just making sure we've got a clear way of restricting access. File locations is, of course, really important, and that structure that we have within a network shared area so that people can find the files that they're looking for, and we are keeping up to date with the files that we're storing. So housekeeping is important. If we shouldn't have anything anymore, do we have a system of archiving it or backing up, or is it something that should be deleted and removed? And that's going to be all set out by the organization in the processes and policies that they have. Of course, our backup procedure. Are we backing up immediately? Do we have periodic backups? Are the backups being kept secure? Are the backups being held in a separate location? Making sure we're making good use of all these file management techniques and we understand why they're beneficial to an organization in terms of the impact they have on the organization is absolutely essential. Turning our attention to the features of good customer care, we need to consider the mechanisms for monitoring and evaluating the quality of customer care, the benefits of good, and the consequences of poor customer care. So we've got positive outcomes if we've got good customer care, and we're likely going to have negative outcomes if we have poor customer care. So strategies for monitoring and evaluating surveys, being aware of what they are in terms of questionnaires, comment cards, undertaking telephone interviews, undertaking online surveys, potentially being able to take part in in-store surveys and asking customers what they think. Getting that feedback is really, really important. But while the gathering of the feedback is important, it's also more important that that is evaluated, it's monitored. So somebody sees that feedback is coming in, they process it, and they take key messages from it to be able to ensure the organization can make changes or celebrate success based upon the information that's coming in. Alongside that, it might be a case of having customer focus groups. So, what's the structure of a customer focus group and what's the purpose of the customer focus group? How is that going to benefit the organization? How does that mechanism help an organization improve? And the organization may also wish to consider using suggestion schemes. So, what is a suggested scheme and how is it going to improve the outcomes for the organization that's implementing it? A question that might relate to this area is compare two methods of evaluating customer service. And it's a 2-mark question. So you're just looking for a comparison of a couple of points. Give it a go. So looking through the answer here then, what couple of methods might I choose to compare? Well, comment cards, questionnaires, surveys that are completed after purchase, focus groups, undertaking mystery shopping, or doing phone calls to customers to find out about their experience. Just pick two of those and have a comparison. So that's where you're taking your knowledge and your understanding of the similarities and all the differences between these two methods of evaluating customer service, and discuss the features, the choices that they're making, and make sure that's trying to use comparative sentences where you can, but drawing out key points for each of them. Similarities and differences are absolutely essential. We're also being asked to consider procedures for organizing and supporting a range of meetings and events. So within the meetings and events, we need to make sure we understand the role of an administrative assistant and a chairperson in planning a meeting. So what activities, what actions are they taking before a meeting, in the time when it's being planned, in that setup time? What's the role and the purpose of the admin assistant? What is the role and the purpose of the chairperson? So what actions are they undertaking before a meeting? We also need to make sure we understand and know the duties and tasks to be completed before, during, and after the meeting or event. So there's some clear actions that need to be taken. Who's undertaking those actions and why are they being undertaken? Making sure we've got a clear understanding of that. The documentation relating to the meeting. So that we've got the notice of a meeting and the agenda. So those are items which are being created and shared in advance of the meeting, so people know from the notice of the meeting when it is, where it is, the key information. And then the agenda, what is going to be discussed at the meeting, that is clearly laid out. Of course, the meeting is then undertaken, and it might be that there's particular documents that need to be shared or discussed at the meeting, and they maybe need to be prepared for that. But we are then going to focus again on what happens after the meeting, and that's the sharing of the minutes. Of course, during the meeting, the minutes will need to be been taken. Who's responsible for taking those minutes? Post-meeting, those minutes will be sent out, including action minutes. So what actions are people going to, have they've been assigned, what actions are they going to take following the meeting? Now, we've got a big option here in terms of the use of digital technology to aid planning and organizing meetings and events. So when we're thinking about the use of technology, we can, of course, think about the efficiencies that it can offer us and the ease in which it allows us to communicate information to those attending meetings or events. So there's very much an opportunity there to talk about the positive impact that the digital technology can have, and the impact in terms of efficiency, time saving, making sure people can get easy access to information. So a question related to this is compare the role of the chairperson and the administrative assistant with regards to meetings. So that's worth 4 marks, and that's a compare question. And then we've got justify the need to send out an agenda in advance of a meeting. That's worth 2 marks, and that's a justify question. Okay, turning our attention to the first part of that question, which was compare the role of the chairperson and the administrative assistant with regards to meetings, worth 4 marks. It's a compare question, so we're looking at similarities and differences. What's the key features in their roles that are similar or different? And we just try and get a good couple of points stated to get ourselves up to 4 marks. So what that might look like is the chairperson will decide on the agenda items, whereas the admin assistant will create the agenda and send it out to attendees. The chairperson will inform the admin assistant of the requirements for a venue, whereas the admin assistant will do the research of possible venues. And then once the decision's been made by the chairperson, the admin assistant will have responsibility for booking it. The chairperson will often decide or request specific equipment or the requirements for the meeting, where the admin assistant has to ensure the equipment is booked or it's arranged so it's ready for the meeting. That could be audio-visual, that could be particular papers or equipment that needs to be used to demonstrate something. The chairperson will decide on the attendees, and the admin assistant will be responsible for inviting those attendees or sending out a notice of the meeting. The chairperson will work through the agenda items in order during the meeting, whereas the admin assistant will take the minutes. So that's where they're taking a note of the meeting and what's happened and what's discussed. And of course, knowing about meeting minutes and action minutes is also important. The admin assistant ensures that the minutes are typed up, whereas the chairperson will go through checking the accuracy before they're distributed. And they'll also probably ask for others at the next meeting to confirm that they're an accurate record of the meeting that occurred. Turning our attention to the second part of that question, which was justify the need to send out an agenda in advance of a meeting. Well, that's a justify question. So you've got to give a good reason to support the suggestions that you're making, or explain the reasons for or against the issues that have been raised. So why would we want to send out an agenda in advance of a meeting? Why is that important? We can get some good justifications there. So, of course, if it's a PLC, if it's a public limited company, then that's a legal requirement that that information is sent out in advance. It can also allow members who should be attending the meeting to decide if they need to attend a meeting. And if we think back to our time management questions earlier, maybe not attending every meeting you're invited to might help someone with their time management. Allow members to prepare thoughts and information or research topics. It's good to be able to go to these meetings fully prepared with information in mind about what they wish to discuss. So making sure that's in place there. Members will know if they're going to be a vote. And of course, if you're holding a meeting where a vote is being held, then people are going to want to have given some thought about which way they wish to vote before they get to the meeting. So by giving them advance notice of that meeting, that thought process, that research, that information gathering can all occur. Alongside that, members should be able to gauge how long a meeting will take. So they gauge the length of a meeting by looking at how long the agenda is that's been set out. If it's got 23 items on the agenda, then of course it's likely to take longer than a meeting that's only got 5 or 10 items. But members will also be able to look at what is on those agenda items, because some agenda items may take up more time than others, and they'll probably have a gut feeling about how much discussion will be needed for each agenda item. And finally, members can alert the chair of additional items to be added. So if they have a look through the agenda and they notice that something isn't missing, it isn't there, and they feel it's missing and it should be there, it should be up for discussion, then members of the group who are meeting will be able to let the admin assistant or let the chairperson know, and that can be added to the agenda in advance of the meeting. So that means there's no surprises, nobody's caught off guard, because everything is set out clearly in advance of the meeting in the agenda. When we're thinking about the appropriate methods of communication and research, within the communication context, we need to make sure we've got a clear understanding to be able to provide an overview of different communication methods that are available, both traditional and digital, to receive, process, and transmit information, including, and then they've picked out 2 areas, and these areas are both digital. So I would be focusing in on these areas: e-diary and social media. So why would we be using e-diary to process and transmit information in terms of time management? I think there's a big benefit there, being able to send out meeting informations directly to people's inboxes, straight to their e-diaries, is going to be a really powerful thing. And then, of course, communication in terms of social media. If we're running events or meetings and they need to be publicized, we're trying to reach a particular audience, social media is a very effective method of communication, particularly if we're looking at engaging with a younger audience who may be more social media engaged than potentially an older audience. So thinking about why we're receiving information, why we're processing it and transmitting it to ensure communication to the right people at the right time. We also need to make sure we've got a clear understanding of how we can use digital technology to communicate information. So in ways that's appropriate to its context, audience, and purpose. So I guess I spoke a little bit about that just with the previous point in terms of younger people might be more engaged with social media, potentially using something like email might suit people who are slightly older, who are computer literate, but it might be that we need to use traditional methods of communication in terms of letter, for example, or notice of meetings within a newspaper for those who access their information in a more traditional way, and that might be generally aimed at older people. So considering what type of information in terms of what the meeting or the event is, making sure we understand that context, making sure we've got an awareness of the audience and who they are, who is meant to be receiving this information, and what's the purpose of the action that we're taking. Turning our attention now to research, being able to assess the reliability and the value of information gathered and comparing it to alternative sources is really important. So you may be given multiple sources of information. Some of those sources will be reliable and high value information. So we know they will have been checked, they will have been carefully put together, and that information will have been curated in a way that suggests that it's of high value and we can trust it. And there might be other information which potentially is just opinion or something that hasn't been fully referenced, hasn't been properly sourced, and that might be of a lower value, and that might not be something that we place such a strong emphasis upon. So making sure when we're undertaking that research, or we're presented with research, and we are balancing up the different sources of information, then we are clear about its reliability and also the value of the information. So a question that might be used for this area is discuss the use of an e-diary when organizing meetings. It's a 4-mark question and it's got that discuss command word there. Okay, so when we're discussing the use of an e-diary when organizing meetings, we know that we're going to have some accurate, relevant points, and that's more than just naming them. And then we're going to develop those points out into a discussion. So automatic invites can be sent out to all attendees at the same time, giving an instant acceptance or decline, depending on how their system's set up. They've also got the ability to automatically set recurring meeting dates into the diary and also the diary of others. Got that ability to be able to set reminders to prompt people in advance of the meeting. That reduces the chance of people not attending because they've had a reminder telling them to come along to the meeting. They can be used on a network or synchronized with other diaries to check availability before selecting a suitable date. Time is saved because people don't have to contact people individually. All of that can happen automatically through that network synchronization. And there's also alerts to users that stop or prevent double bookings from occurring. The meeting documentation can be attached and sent alongside the meeting information, and that can lead to attendees being better informed and prepared for the decision making. So that might be getting the relevant documents or papers in advance. You can quickly search through your appointments and contacts when preparing for a meeting, so you're inviting the right people to that meeting. And of course, you've got the ability to be able to have inbuilt to-do lists, which allow for meeting tasks to be allocated to individuals and also prioritized in the correct order as well. So e-diaries have absolutely revolutionized how we go about organizing meetings. Okay, all that's left for me to do is to wish you the very best of luck in your forthcoming exams, of course, particularly within your higher admin NIT examination. Make sure you're taking your time, not rushing through the paper. You want to really understand what the question is asking you. We've obviously got a strong steer from the guidance from the SQA about what the exam content may look like. But of course, having a really broad approach to your revision, making sure you're working really closely with your teacher or the person responsible for delivering your course to make sure you've got their interpretation of the guidance and you've practiced lots of past paper exam questions, because the more you can practice the previous questions, the more likely you are to feel confident about the exams that will be presented to you in the final exam, and you'll know how you want to go around approaching that exam. You'll know what command words and what particular actions you want to take from those command words to be able to secure all the marks that are available for you. But from me, the very best of luck, and I hope you do really, really well in all of your exams. Thanks very much for joining me in this video. Bye-bye.